Hello and welcome to Inside the Rails, a monthly podcast for horse racing enthusiasts everywhere. And I'm delighted to say that we're sponsored and supported by the RSA, the Racehorse Syndicates Association. So a big thank you to them. And as ever, I'm joined by my co-host, Phil Boyle from BG Racing. Hi, Phil. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you, Simon. I'm still recovering a little bit from last week's Cheltenham Festival. It was a busy old week, wasn't it?
It certainly was. 4 days of fairy tale stories as ever. We'll be reviewing Cheltenham during the course of this podcast, talking about owners coming back onto the racecourse. And we'll be having as our special guest, Dan Abraham, chair of the RSA. So really looking forward to hearing Dan's thoughts on racing post-pandemic. Now, going back to Cheltenham, there weren't any owners present, very different from a year ago, of course, when there were 70, 80,000 spectators there a day. I don't think you had any runners at Cheltenham, but what did you do to actually keep your owners engaged and entertained during Cheltenham week?
Well, obviously, Cheltenham's a very social occasion, Simon. I mean, I look forward to going every year as much as anything to catch up with a lot of my shareholders at the races and a lot of friends that I know from racing. And that obviously wasn't possible this year, but all of these new tools and techniques that we've learned over the course of the last 12 months sort of came into play. So we had a shareholder evening where we interviewed one of our trainers, Neil Mulholland, in the week before the festival, which was great so that people could ask him a little bit more about his backstory, and he ran us through any runners he had at the festival. And then each day of the festival, I held a shareholder Zoom call at 11:30 each morning, and I ran through the card for the day and collected sort of tips from everybody else in terms of what their big fancies were. And we ran a tipping competition as well over the course of the week. I put up a bottle of wine for the winner. So that all went down and created a bit of friendly competition. And I was proud to say that after a bad first day, I tried to chase the victory in the tipping competition, and much to the humour of everybody else, I ended up finishing stone last in my own tipping competition, which was quite good. So you were busy as well, weren't you? You were running an event as well.
I'm laughing and smiling to myself because I did a couple of Zooms as well, and I ran a tipping competition, and my tipping wasn't a lot better than yours. But yeah, I ran a Zoom on the Tuesday for my owners, so we did a tipster competition and basically ran through, did previewing the races. I had a guy called Kevin Minter, who's known as the Colonel, used to work, I think, for the Daily Star many years ago. So he came on as well. And then Friday, Gold Cup Day, I was actually commissioned by a local firm of solicitors. I do a lot of networking, and a small family firm, although ever-growing, called Raiden Solicitors, booked me to have 40 of their contacts, so heads of chambers and senior clerks coming on. And again, we did a tipping competition, and we got Colin Brown. I don't know if you know Colin Brown. He was famous for riding Desert Orchid. He came on and went through the card with me. And in fact, we had Amy Murphy came on, and on the way to Cheltenham with one of her runners there. So she came on. So she's had a dry run, ready to come on to the RSA podcast Inside the Rails next month.
And I know a lot of other syndicates did similar things. I mean, it's another reason why I would hope people would consider getting involved in shared ownership, because, you know, it does really build that sense of community, doesn't it?
Definitely. And, you know, it'll be interesting to see. We're all looking forward to owners actually coming back onto the track. But it'll be interesting to see whether we all do keep up all of this Zooming. I think it's sort of here to stay, isn't it, really, to an extent. I look upon it as an add-on, or it will be an add-on to the racecourse experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's a lot of stuff there that I know in my business that I've started doing this year that I wish I'd started doing before, and I will definitely keep them going.
Maybe you and I didn't do very well in actually giving tips for our tipster competitions for our owners, but how did you get on during Cheltenham, and what were some of the highlights for you? Because no owners there, no spectators, but as ever, there were some fabulous stories and some marvellous racing, wasn't there? Your highlights, Phil?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it was a strange atmosphere off of the course, obviously, but I still think ITV did a great job of covering the festival. And on the track, I mean, it was no different, was it, on the track? The performances were still there. We had the horses coming in with big reputations that they managed to uphold. So horses like Appreciate It and Shishkin, who ran in the first two races of the festival, and to a lesser extent, Luke Harvey last month was very keen to see Monkfish, and he managed not to have his bubble burst in his race, although perhaps he wasn't as impressive as a lot of people thought that he might be. But some of them did fall by the wayside, some of these big reputations. Chakamp-Ossoir was beaten. Big shock when Envoy Allen fell in his race. And the horse that I remember mentioning a couple of months ago as the horse I was most looking forward to at the festival was Zanayir in the Triumph Hurdle. And it was billed as a battle between Zanayir from Ireland and Tritonic from the UK. And they ended up both being beaten by the well-backed Quilixios on the day, which was yet another winner for probably the story of the festival, which was Rachel Blackmore. She had a fantastic time, didn't she?
Well, she did, and certainly I looked at Cheltenham really from two angles, like an emotional angle and if you like, a punting angle. From a betting angle, yeah, Rachel Blackmore. Once she'd had one winner, I did take a little bit of the 5-1 about her being top jockey. I don't really take any credit for that because it was Kevin Minter, the Colonel, on our Tuesday Zoom, who actually was talking to me about, he wondered what sort of odds that she would actually be. So, as I said, she'd had the one winner, and I looked in, I thought 5-1 in the end looked ridiculous, didn't it, as it turned out. From an emotional angle, for me, the two highlights were, I think, Tiger Roll. Anybody who says that National Hunter horses don't enjoy their jumping, just watch a rerun of that cross-country race. He was like a 4-year-old, wasn't he? Absolutely loved it and absolutely bolted up. It was lovely to see him back. And another highlight for me, slightly left field, was actually little Frodon enjoying himself. Similar sort of tale, really. I don't think he stays the Cheltenham trip, does he? But he was out there absolutely thoroughly enjoying himself. And, he was beaten in the end. But that was another highlight for me.
Yeah, they were. I mean, Tiger Roll particularly it was hard for anybody that knows their racing not to get sort of a bit emotionally involved in that race, because he just hasn't looked the same horse this year. And that day he looked back to his absolute best, bowling along in front, having a great time and pulling away to win. And in some ways that overshadowed some of the big races, Honeysuckle winning the Champion and Allaho in the Ryanair and Minella Indo in the Gold Cup, but people will be talking about Tiger Roll instead, I suspect, which just shows sort of what a high regard that he's actually held in.
Well, he is really a big public horse, isn't he? And I know I'm on the flat and you're both flat and National Hunt, but they always say about the jumps game, don't they? It's about these horses coming back year after year, which is lovely, and the public do latch onto them.
Well, I mean, you're absolutely right about horses coming back year on year. I mean, the horse that won the Champion Chase, Put the Kettle On, obviously won at the festival last year. And as much as everybody was talking about Chakamp-Ossoir before the race, you couldn't really argue with the Cheltenham credentials of the winner in the end. And there was some other, it was just, the festival's listed with brilliant performances. I mean, there was a horse called the Shunter that won one of the races, which meant that he won
got the bonus.
A bonus for winning a race, earlier in the season. And on a personal level, my trainer, Neil Mulholland, had a horse, Milkwood, running in one of the big handicaps, the county hurdle. And he was leading at the last hurdle. And I must admit, I was beginning to hope that Neil was going to have a festival winner, but unfortunately just didn't quite get up the hill and ended up finishing third.
We've got the flat season starting very soon, and we've got owners coming back to the racecourse for the first time in a long while on the 29th of March. So initially just 2 owners can go, but then that's increasing to 6 owners from April 12th. Just wondered what your thoughts are on that, and are your owners all getting very excited about the prospect of going back to the track?
Oh, absolutely. The prospect of going back to the track, and also the prospect of getting back to the stables to see their horses on the gallops, etc. Let's hope that sooner rather than later we can get larger owners groups on the racecourse, because even 6 is probably not going to be enough for a lot of syndicate owners who've been starved of action and will be desperate to get back to see their horses racing.
It wasn't very long ago that sadly the sport lost Prince Khalid Abdullah, a huge owner-breeder for the sport. And then this week, sadly, we hear the death of Sheikh Hamdan, those famous blue and white silks. Again, Shadwell starred, a massive contributor over several decades to not just British racing, but worldwide racing. He'll be a sad loss and a big loss to the industry, won't he?
Oh, absolutely. And I saw a story a couple of weeks ago that Shadwell Stud were cutting back their breeding operations in the southern hemisphere, and the reason that they gave was that Sheikh Hamdan was very hands-on and couldn't be as hands-on in the southern hemisphere. Obviously, now that he's not with us anymore, it does remain to be seen whether someone else will take over that breeding operation or whether or not that'll have such a prominent role going forward. But people shouldn't underestimate the impact that these big breeding operations have in terms of the number of top quality horses that they produce, not just to run in their own colours, but to go through the sales and to be owned by other people as well. That's certainly going to leave a big hole in the industry, isn't it?
Absolutely. And the thing is about these owner breeders, and I think certainly Prince Khalid Abdullah and Sheikh Hamdan fall into this category. They've pumped huge amounts of money into very professional setups, but as individuals and personalities, fairly shy and retiring and sort of understated, aren't they, really?
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely true. I mean, I couldn't tell you much about Sheikh Hamdan as a person because you didn't see him interviewed very often. You normally see the racing manager or somebody like that interviewed on the TV rather than the owner themselves. But as you say, the money that they put into the sport is, I mean, it's not essential, but it's very important in terms of development of racing and prize money and all of those things that we sort of love about the sport, having the top quality horses. It's probably one of my earliest racing memories is seeing Nashwan streaking clear in the Derby at Epsom in 1990. I mean, I would have been 20 years old then. So Sheikh Hamdan, who owned Nashwan, has been owning horses ever since. That's over 30 years he's been involved in British racing, and he was probably involved before I had that recollection. So, it will certainly leave a big gap that somebody else will need to fill.
Yes, no doubt, Phil, at all. He'll be a big loss to the industry, but he leaves behind a huge legacy. Well, I'm delighted to say we've got Dan Abraham, chair of the Racehorse Syndicates Association, on the line. Hi, Dan. How are you?
I'm very good. Thanks, Simon. Thanks for having me on.
You're very welcome. Now, I liken you to the Tony Bloom of the RSA. Now, Tony Bloom, for those of you who don't know, is not only a major racehorse owner, but he's also chairman of Brighton Football Club. Well, Dan, you run your own syndicate company, Foxtrot Racing. You're chair of the RSA, the Racehorse Syndicates Association, but you're also a qualified football coach. Now, I bet you are wondering, Dan, that whether you're actually on Inside the Rails or a Peter Crouch podcast. But I do know you've had this big interest in football and racing, and I remember in 2019, the RSA had a syndicate Sunday at Stratford, and you were actually flying in from a tournament in Sweden that morning. So tell us a bit about Dan Abraham and your interest in football and how you got into racing.
Well, I think my father was a huge influence on me growing up. And when I was young, he used to take me to every sports event that he could find in the paper and let me experience different sports, both playing and watching. But I think you get to an age, probably when you're a teenager, that you decide which sports you particularly enjoy and want to carry on with. And for me, football was one that I loved, and I loved playing football. I wasn't particularly talented, albeit I did manage to get myself a very short trial at a Premier League football club. But I remember the warm up was so much for me. I pretty much was sick in the warm up. I've never played so hard in my life, and thankfully after a few days they appreciated that I wasn't quite up to it and moved me on. But nevertheless, I always enjoyed playing football. I went to university, was club captain there, played for the first 11, and actually after university took on a sabbatical role whereby I oversaw the sports clubs and societies at Reading University. So sports very much been ingrained in me since I was young. But my father was very into sort of performance. I mean, he, although ran a haulage company in the north of England, he was involved very heavily within Yorkshire Golf and really saw them become the key county for producing top amateur players, and then was offered a role as director of coaching with the English Golf Union, became England team manager, and I think it's fair to say was very much responsible for that generation of English players such as Paul Casey, Danny Willett, and even now Matthew Fitzpatrick, who are coming through the ranks. And what he did is he was very open to the idea of performance and what it takes to get the best out of players or athletes, and that has always sort of been in my mind. And so once I realised that my playing days probably weren't ahead of me, I got